Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to see you all here. Last week we started our sort of part one of this class called The Seven Wonders of Jewish History. We basically, just a quick kind of review, we talked about how, if somebody sits next to you on the plane and says, how do you know you're right? How do you know that you as a Jew are right? Your answer should not be, well, I grew up that way, because then everyone else is right for growing up the other way. And we also don't want to say, well, I just have faith, because there's got to, hopefully, Judaism, while Christianity says those who have faith don't ask questions, those who ask questions don't have faith, Judaism says, ask away, my friend, ask away. So we are a religion that tries to be based on things that make sense when we ask questions and things that we can wrap our minds around. So how do we know that we are right? And what I talked about is that pretty much all the religious texts in the world talk about what's going to happen in kingdom come. Right? You follow this religion, you'll get eternal bliss, you'll get 70 good friends in heaven if you do jihad or whatever it is. But they don't talk about what's going to happen in this world. And it's very clear why. Because if you predict all kinds of things are going to happen in this world, and then they don't come true, you lose your followers very quickly. Which is why anybody who's writing a Bible or a book that they hope to be the starter of a religion that will go on for 1,000 years is going to stay very far away from making bold and very specific predictions about what will happen in this world. Rather, they'll tell you what's going to happen in the next world, and nobody can ever prove if it's true or false. However, our book, as we discussed, does the exact opposite. If you look at the entire Tanakh, the entire books of the Jewish canon, you will not find anything about the world to come. However, you will find tremendously explicit descriptions of what will happen in this world. And the things that it describes are wild, wild predictions. And we started last week with the first prediction, the idea of an eternal nation, that one family, the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the people who stood at Sinai, their family would be here forever, is a very bold prediction. There's been about 5,000 peoples in the history of mankind, in the modern history of mankind, and very few of them are eternal people. The Babylonians, the Persians, so many of the people that used to be great, the ancient Egyptians, all the greatest empires that ruled the world are all gone today. The Manchus and the Mongols, and you think about all these groups, they're all gone today. So to make a prediction that any group is going to be eternal is a very foolish prediction. Because 99.5% of peoples are not, 99, I think we did the math yesterday, about 99.9% of peoples are not going to be here forever. People just assimilate out and change constantly, these cultural diffusion, shifting of peoplehood and identities. So to make a prediction that anyone's going to be an eternal nation would not be a good bet. Yet our book made that bet, and not only did it make that bet, last week we read that not only does those sources tell us that we are going to still be here, but it says that we are still going to be here forever and ever, and we're constantly going to still be talking over the words of the covenant, which is what we are doing right here, right now. So it's a very, very bold prediction, not true for 99.9% of people, but the Torah makes that prediction again and again and again, and here we are. Okay, give me 1 second. I'm going to get a source sheet here. We're out of source sheets. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, the second thing we wanted to talk about, and we started talking about it yesterday, is the idea of exile. Exile is not a popular thing in history. Why? Because when you exile people out of the land, they can't send you tribute, they can't send you slaves, the land lays desolate and valueless to you. What usually happens throughout history is when a person, or like Alexander the Great, takes over a huge swath of land, he doesn't exile the people out of it, he leaves them right there and says, pay me tribute. As a matter of fact, Alexander the Great, very smart, actually had his officers stay behind in each area and marry the local population so he could easily govern it. So exiles are incredibly unpopular in history. Who can name the exiles in the history of the world, besides Jewish exiles? Okay, so the Armenians. The Armenians more of a genocide than exile, right? But yeah, okay, so the Armenians, that was because they wanted their land. Okay, the Armenian. Who else? The Native Americans, right? The Trail of Tears, right? The Cherokee Trail of Tears, where they literally took the people and said, we want your land. We don't want it to lay desolate. We want to live in it, so we're going to throw you out of here, and we're going to live in your lands. Anybody else? Okay, so there's one more famous exile, the exile of Carthage. In the Punic Wars between Rome and Carthage, there was a whole back and forth. The people who came from Carthage and sacked Rome, and then Rome went to Carthage. and basically took the entire population of Carthage and threw them out and exiled them. It was an act of revenge, and that's another example of an exile in history. There are very few other examples of exiles in history, and therefore we could say that exiles occurred, again, out of the 5,000 peoples in the history of the world, exile occurred to maybe 5 of them, which is 0.1%. How many people have been exiled twice? Absolutely nobody but the Jews. Okay, it's an amazing thing. In the history of the world, nobody has been exiled twice but the Jews. And we, of course, have 2 very explicit descriptions of our exile in the Torah. One in the book of Leviticus, towards the end of Leviticus, and one in the middle of Deuteronomy. Very different exiles being described. Our sages tell us that the first one applies to the exile of Babylonia, which happened in around the year 586 before the Common Era, and of course the exile by Rome, which happened around the year 70 of the Common Era. We have been exiled twice, which again is not only so rare in history because it makes no sense, but also it's also incredibly rare to say to a people, you're going to live forever, but you're going to be exiled out of their land. Do you know why there has not been multiple exiles for most people? Because most people have been exiled just sort of fell off as a people. Look at the Native Americans. They were exiled out of their lands and they've really never made a comeback. The Armenians have been exiled off their lands and killed off, and they've never really made a comeback. And the people of Carthage don't exist anymore today. There is no Carthage anymore. So exiling twice is almost impossible, because who makes it back from an exile? Okay. So, let's see though, the Torah, the same book that in last week we read about, is telling you, you are going to be here forever. You, your family, the Jewish people, you're going to be here forever. And not only are you going to be here forever, you're going to be talking of my covenant forever. Also tells us, but you're not going to be able to have a strong homeland. Because you're going to be thrown off of your homeland and scattered all over the world. Which again, doesn't make sense. An eternal nation, you'd think they would have to be stuck in one place. They'd have a homeland, they'd stay there, no one would bother them, and they'd be eternal. But no. We're told we're going to be eternal despite being exiled. Okay, let's see the sources inside. Source number 4. Let me first stop and make a blessing. All right, we got a lot of energy here tonight. Here we go. Thank you, God, for making this beautiful and amazing H2O. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. And while I'm pausing to thank God for this incredible water, I remembered I've not yet extended a great, deep thank you to all of you for showing up today. Please give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you for coming out. And also I want to thank the amazing staff of Partners Detroit, and Yeshiva Bet Yehuda, and the JCC, including Bela Burnham, Rosa Chesler. Let's give them a round of applause. All right. Number 4. Little known fact, by the way, about Bela Burnham. Her name used to be Bela Hachheiser, and she amazingly used to volunteer as almost all of our lunch and learns. And every single week I would talk about it, I would thank all the people, and I would say, and especially a great thanks to our most amazing volunteer, Bela Hachheiser, and then she got married and she works for us now. Isn't that amazing? Okay, amazing fact. Okay, number 4. Number 4. You will be torn from the land which you are about to occupy. That's a great friendly way to introduce you. You're about to go into the land of Israel, and Moses tells the people, we're going to go in there, but you're going to be torn away from there, and God will scatter you among all the peoples from one end of the earth to the other. Then I shall scatter you among the nations and disperse you over foreign lands, says Ezekiel in 22:15. So have we been scattered? Has this come true? Have we been scattered all over the world? Meaning, I'll give you an example. You're not going to find many Native Americans, for example, in China. Right? You're not going to find many Native Americans in South Africa. They've been exiled, but they're not exiled all over the world. Unfortunately, they were shunted to North Dakota. Right? The Jewish people have literally been scattered all over the world. It's an amazing thing, almost wherever you go, except for Iceland, by the way. I was in Iceland 2 weeks ago, and there's like 10 Jews there. Even Chabad, there's no Chabad there. When there's no Chabad in a place, you know this place is devoid of Jews. Because there's for sure a Chabad outpost on the moon, right? When the astronauts came off on the moon, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, there's probably some guy saying, hey, you guys want to put on tefillin, They're everywhere, and it's amazing, by the way. To me, as a person who travels a lot, I so appreciate and depend on Chabad. Wherever you go, they're amazing, but yet I came to Iceland and there was no Chabad there, which tells you there's just very few Jews in Iceland. There are some, by the way, 10 Jewish families. Okay, Now, let's see source number 5. As a result of the relentless persecutions and forced expulsions, most Jews are but recent newcomers to their respective lands of residence. 90% of the Jewish people have lived in their new homes for no more than 100 years. The majority of the large Jewish settlements date back no more than 50 or 60 years. 75% of Jewry has thus been displaced in 3 lands, Israel, America, and Russia, while the remaining 25% are dispersed throughout over 100 lands on all 5 continents. That's a major, major thing. I don't think he means on all 5 continents, but on 5 continents, right? There's actually 7 continents. Not a big Jewish population on Antarctica either, from what I understand. Okay, so next, so that's the first thing, right? We got Jews everywhere. New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Kenya, Ethiopia, right? Go to anywhere in Europe, right? Anywhere you go, pretty much. Chile, Argentina, Peru, right? Venezuela. Okay. As a matter of fact, I don't even know why he said on 5 continents. It's really 6 continents, right? You got Jews scattered all over Europe, all over Asia, all over North America, South America, Africa, and Australia. The only one we're missing really is Antarctica. Okay. So what we see here is the same book that told us that we were going to be an eternal nation, a very bold claim, something that only happens to like 0.1% of people. It also told us that we were going to be exiled from our land and thrown out and dispersed all over the world. Which again, that doesn't make sense. If you want a people to remain and be eternal, leave them be. Let them sit on their homeland and grow, and you leave them alone. Maybe they would be an eternal people. But yet this book says we're going to be eternal and says we're going to be all over the world. So how does this make any sense? So I've got a theory. Maybe if wherever we go, we're welcomed in and appreciated. So even though we're going to be exiled all over the world, but because we're so appreciated and treated so well, we all want to maintain our strong Jewish identity, right? That would make sense. Maybe even though we're going to be exiled, we'll be able to make it through because we're loved and appreciated and respected, and therefore everyone wants to hold on to their Jewish identity. It's amazing. However, that's not exactly what the Torah describes for us. The Torah actually describes that we're going to be exiled, and we are going to be hounded and killed and murdered and tortured and humiliated pretty much almost wherever we go. Doesn't exactly describe a rosy future for us in exile. And if you look at our people's history, it is unreal. You look at the Wikipedia page for anti-Semitism and you read, it's incredible. All the expulsions that we've endured, the murders and the pogroms and the blood libels, everywhere we've gone, it's an incredible thing. Let's talk about anti-Semitism for a moment. What do you call somebody who hates the Chinese?
Racist.
Xenophobic or racist, right? Okay? You would call someone who hates black people racist, someone who hates Chinese xenophobic, right? What do you call someone who hates Armenians?
Turks.
What? Turkish.
I knew that.
That was great. What do you call, that's great by the way. What do you call someone who hates Armenians? A racist, whatever, right? What do you call somebody who hates Mormons? A religious bigot, right? What do you call someone who hates a Jew? Anti-Semite. Do you realize that we are the only kind of hatred that gets its own phrase? We've got our own phrase. We got to pat ourselves on the back. We earned it, right? It's been a difficult battle, but we earned our own form of racism. Everyone's got general terms: racism, bigotry, right? And xenophobia, we've earned our own term: anti-Semitism. Why is that? What I'm about to show you is that anti-Semitism is different than every other form of hatred in 4 ways. Number 1, universality. Jews are hated all over the world, right? I asked before, what do you call an Armenian, someone who hates Armenians, and you said Turkish, and you're right? Because that's who hates the Armenians. In America, we couldn't care less about Armenians, right? They're just the same as other people. The Turks and the Kurds, they hate the Armenians because they're all fighting a little land battle over that area, so they hate each other there. But no one in Africa or Africa or North America, South America, we don't care about Armenians. What do you call people who hate the Kurds? Right? Also Turkish, right? There you go, also the Turkish, right? So over there in Kurdistan, so you got the Iraqis hate the Kurds, and the Iranians hate the Kurds, and the Turkish hate the Kurds. But we don't care. We don't hate the Kurds. No one cares about the Kurds in America, right? But Jews, amazingly, are hated universally all over the world. Next, intensity. As we will see, the intensity of the hatred for the Jew is far greater than the intensity of the hatred for any other people. We'll see in a moment why. Longevity. So right now, for example, there may be a rise of anger against the Kurds because they want their own country now. But it's not like the Kurds have been hated for thousands of years. As a matter of fact, a lot of the sort of the sectarian strife and a lot of the hatreds have been based on the way we redistrict. When the imperial powers came in and colonized the various places and wrote maps that didn't take into account long-standing tribal affiliations or hatreds or whatever it was, we created a lot of the friction and tension in many of the areas. That being said, though, it's not like hatred of the Kurd has been a constant for all of history. What we're going to see is hatred of the Jew has been a constant for all of history. And lastly, irrationality. It makes no sense to hate the Jew. Jews are great for the host countries that they live in. And we'll see more about that. So let's go through them all one at a time. Yes?
Yeah, there is. I disagree with you.
Okay.
I think that it's the fear that early Christians had and has been propagated through literacy during the Middle Ages, that the Jews were the mother religion and Judaism was to be eradicated, feared, decimated, so that it wouldn't threaten the nation to Christianity, and that really spiraled into all forms of anti-Semitism.
Okay, I'll tell you the challenge with that, because the challenge with that is that would account for if, number one, it was primarily Christians, only the Christians who hated the Jews, but that's not the case, number one. And number two, the Christians had other mother religions they were contending with. They were fighting against paganism, they were fighting against Zoroastrianism, they were fighting against a number of other religions at the time, right, when they first sort of came of age. And yet there's no sort of situation like that with any of the other groups. As a matter of fact, with many of the other groups, they adopted their practices to a certain degree and made sort of peace. Where do you think the Christmas tree comes from? The Christmas tree is an attempt to bring in the members of the Asherah faith, which was a very large tree-worshipping faith at the time. And they said, here, you guys can become part of Christianity. We'll bring the trees indoors and we'll wrap them up on the 25th of December as a baby gift for little Jay. You know what I'm saying? So that was not, but they didn't create that same conflict with other mother religions. People will say often, well, the reason why the Jews are hated is because they're so successful and so rich. But then the problem is we look at countries where Jews were very poor and unsuccessful, and they were still hated. So we can always try to throw out, and this is often what happens. We say, well, this is why it happened, but when you start looking at other places where that didn't occur, we don't see that. So and we'll give more examples of the irrationality in a moment, of just how irrational it gets. Let's first look at universality. How universal is anti-Semitism? So let's talk about just where we've been expelled from. England, 1290, obviously our own country, the land of Israel, we talk about the two exiles, but more than that. England, 1290, France, 1306 and 1394, Hungary in 1349 and 1360, Austria in 1421. Various places in Germany, which was not yet Germany yet, throughout the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries. From Lithuania in 1445 and 1495, Spain in 1492, Portugal 1497. From Bohemia and Moravia in 1744 and 1745. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, Jews were not permitted into Russia, and when they were finally permitted, they were only permitted to go into a place called the Pale of the Settlement. Does not sound like the kind of place that I would like to settle in. In Arab countries, Jews living in Arab countries were made to feel like second-class citizens throughout their entire time. Violent outbreaks sporadically occurred throughout the 1300 years of Arab lands from the time of Muhammad, up until it came to a climax in the years 1948 and 1967. During that period, almost all the Jews living in Aden, Algeria, Egypt, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, over 500,000 in all, were forced to flee for their lives, right? So, the Palestinians talk about how they ran away because Israelis, whatever. There's 500,000 Jews who were forced to run away from their homes, their businesses, everything, in these Arab countries, afraid for their lives, and legitimately so. And most of them came to Israel, and that's why you have such a massive Sephardic population in Israel, because they were fleeing for their lives. In the wake of pogroms, assaults, and massacres, occurring in these Arab countries. So that's some areas. There's been evidence of anti-Semitism in Japan. Now the reason why that's unique is because Japan is the most homogenous country in the world, right? So here we have a country that's filled with Japanese, not really filled with a lot of Jews, but yet for some reason they hate the Jews too. So we see that hatred of the Jew occurs all over the world in many places that have never seen a Jew before in their lives. Next, intensity. The intensity of the hatred for the Jew is unmatched. The ultimate example is the Holocaust, where 6 million men, women, and children were put into ovens, were put into forests, and shot and killed. By the way, many people estimate the number to be higher, some as high as 7.5 million. Right? There's actually an amazing priest, his name is Father Dubois. He goes around Ukraine and other areas like that, Latvia, Romania, and he speaks to villagers. And because he's a Catholic French priest, the people will talk to him openly, and he finds the oldest people in the village, and he says, what happened here during the Holocaust? And the people, and he's got it all on tape, and they'll take him out into the fields, they'll show him where they've been. There's often, you can see, people will dig. It's like people try to go on the beaches looking for sand and prizes with their little, the little metal detectors. People, till today, are still looting the mass graves of the Jews, looking for jewelry, gold teeth, etc., etc. And he's going around documenting. He believes the number of people killed in the Holocaust was closer to 7.5 to 9 million. Because there's millions and millions of people that never made it into the Germans' documentation system. They were very good at documentation, the Germans, but many didn't make it in because they were killed. The Romanians, for example. The Nazis didn't go into Romania to kill the Jews. They just sent the black guards from Romania. The Romanians themselves took care of the Jewish problem in Romania. Took them all out into the forest and shot them. So the intensity of and the world standing by, right? When you are in Auschwitz, there's a famous guardhouse in Auschwitz. There's a picture that you can see that shows American bombs directly above that guardhouse that were taken from an American bomber. Now, if you realize when a bomber is flying at 200 miles an hour, 300 miles an hour, and it releases bombs, the bombs don't go straight down because there's the inertia. So if you want to hit a target 3, 4, 6 miles away, you release the bombs now, and those bombs continue moving forward and down. The U.S. bombers were bombing the A.G. Farben plants, the chemical plants near Auschwitz. They didn't bother to bomb the rail lines, although there was great clamor from American Jews saying, bomb the rail lines. How much information has come out telling us now how America was very well aware of what was going on as early as 1942. And the world stood by to watch 6.5 million people murdered, put into literal ovens and gas chambers and killed systematically. And the world does nothing? What are other examples? Now, by the way, was the Holocaust the worst massacre of Jews? No, it wasn't. As a matter of fact, much more were killed by the church in the Dark Ages, right? Jews were strung up and burned alive at the stake. The estimate is somewhere between 11 and 13 million, but it occurred over hundreds and hundreds of years. So the Holocaust, the Crusades, before the Crusades, the Inquisition, right? Of course, the Holocaust was a very short period of time. But the estimate is between 11 and 13 million Jews killed by the church over the Dark Ages and the first part of the second millennia. So the intensity of the hatred of the Jew, to have families coming around on Sunday morning to watch the Jews burning at the stake, bringing their kids with popcorn and potato chips. Come kids, we're going to watch the Jews burn. And watching a family of Jews, men, women, and children being burned alive at the stake. And they're sitting there eating their snacks, watching with great merriment. The intensity of the hatred of the Jew and what's been done to us is unmatched in all of history. Next, longevity. When was the first time that we were attacked for being Jewish? Right when we came out of Egypt. The nation of Amalek came to attack us. Why? Because of who we were. We were sitting in the desert. We weren't taking anyone's oil. We weren't taking anyone's land. We weren't taking anyone's anything. We were sitting there not bothering anybody. Comes along the nation of Amalek to attack us because of who we are. When was the most? So that was the first Jewish attack. When we were literally birthed as a nation, we were already attacked in our fetal stage. When was the most recent anti-Semitic attack?
Yesterday, probably.
Today, probably. Right? Today, probably. Every day, right? So we have literally been hated for the entirety of our history. Next, the irrationality. We are the only people ever accused of deicide. What does deicide mean? What does homicide mean? Killing of a homo sapien. Right? What does suicide mean? Killing of self. What does deicide mean?
Killing Jesus.
Killing a deity. Killing God. Now let me tell you a secret. If your God can be killed by a bunch of Jewish boys and girls, right? It's time for you to go out and get a new God, right? You clearly bought the wrong model, right? Because gods are supposed to be immortal, right? Gods are supposed to be all-powerful. If your God can be killed, the idea of deicide is absurd. Who could kill a god? But we're the only nation in the world ever accused of deicide. What else are we accused of? Poisoning the wells, poisoning the air, right? Throughout the Dark Ages. Drinking Christian blood in our matzah. That is still going on to this very day. There are still filmmakers making films of Jews kidnapping Arab children often, and Christian children, and slaughtering their bodies and putting it. They're still making films. They're still making films. Okay, next. The Jews in Germany were accused of bringing socialism and communism to Germany and being responsible for Germany losing World War I, despite the fact that they only made up less than 1% of the German population. At the same time, the Jews in America are being accused and persecuted for being communists. The Jews in Russia are being accused and being persecuted for being capitalists. Right? There's a famous forgery purporting to be the description of the world being the discussion to take over the world. It happens every 100 years. What's that called? The Protocols of Elders of Zion, right? That's a absurd book put out by the NKVD, the Russian secret police, in the early 1900s, okay? Wildly popular all over the world, right? By the way, did any of you guys get the invitation to this next meeting? I'm kidding. The crazy thing, there was a filmmaker, a Jewish filmmaker, who was sitting in a cab. And the guy didn't realize he was Jewish, and the cabbie and him are talking, and he's like, yeah, the Jews are taking over the world, taking over the world. She says, really, how do you know this? He's like, the protocols. And they're like, what are you talking about? He says, the protocols of the Elders of Zion. And he was Jewish, but he vaguely remembered hearing about it, but he couldn't believe that anybody in the modern age is still talking about this. So he decided to do a documentary trying to figure out, are there still people who believe in the protocols of Elders of Zion? And the answer was an overwhelming yes. People all over the world today still ardently believe that Jews gather and discuss how we're taking over the world. It's amazing. Somebody I know who was in medical school, listen to this insanity. He was in medical school and he said he was working over a body. It was the middle of medical school, so you often work over cadavers. And he's working over a body, and across from him is a very bright, nice Asian fellow. And they're talking. So he says to the Jewish guy, why did you decide to go into medicine? He says, listen, it's an opportunity where it can help people, and it's a good profession. You can make a good livelihood. He says, yeah, but why don't you open a business? He says, listen, I don't know. Most businesses fail. He says, yeah, but you're Jewish. He says, okay. He says, yeah, but don't worry. You could open a business. Don't worry, you're Jewish. He's like, what are you talking about? He's like, listen, I know the deal. Don't worry about it. He's like, what deal do you know? He's like, look, I know there's a secret Jewish underground thing where no matter how many businesses you start and fail, they'll keep funding you until you're successful. Now, this is a bright guy, by the way. He's a nice guy, not an anti-Semite. This guy's not an anti-Semite. He's just totally, insanely ignorant, right? Insanely ignorant, and yet, and he's a bright guy. He's going to become a doctor. This is the irrationality out there. Okay. And again, like I said before, there were so many countries that literally would send out proclamations inviting the Jews to their country because they knew their economy was in shambles. And Jews are able to invigorate an economy wherever Jews go. Real estate values go up, right? So they would invite, back in the day, they used to literally, kings would put up proclamations saying, Jews, you're invited here, you'll be safe here. And the Jews would come and they would shore up the economy and everything would be going great. 50 years later, they'd throw them out of the country. What are you doing? These are the people that you invited when you, as a nation, were bankrupt and they got everything back running again. Infrastructure's running, economy's running, and you're throwing them out. It's absurd. It's crazy. Okay. Let's see what the historians have to say about anti-Semitism. Number 6. This is from a book written by Lloyd George, a British historian in the year 1923. Of all the extreme fanaticism that plays havoc in man's nature, there is none as irrational as anti-Semitism. The Jews cannot vindicate themselves in the eyes of these fanatics. If the Jews are rich, they are victims of theft and extortion. If they are poor, they are victims of ridicule. If they take sides in a war, it's because they wish to gain advantage from the spilling of non-Jewish blood. If they espouse peace, it's because they are scared and anxious by nature, traitors to their country. If the Jew dwells in a foreign land, he is persecuted and expelled. If he wishes to return to his own land, he is prevented from doing so. That's Lloyd George in 1923. The next one is going to be an article written by, hold on a second, Martin Gilbert, also another great Jewish historian. He's a Jewish, Lloyd George is not Jewish, but I don't think, Martin Gilbert is a Jewish historian who just passed away recently. And he wrote this book about our history, and this is from the foreword. But as my research into Jewish history progressed, I was surprised, depressed, and to some extent overwhelmed by the perpetual and irrational violence which pursued the Jews in every country and to almost every corner of the globe. If therefore persecution, expulsion, torture, humiliation, and mass murder haunt these pages, it is because they also haunt the Jewish story. Now again, the same book that told us that we were going to be eternal, despite an eternal nation being an almost statistical impossibility. And despite the same book saying that we are going to be exiled twice, something that happened to no other nation, and even exile only happens to less than 0.1% of people, that same book said that we were going to suffer tremendously. Tremendously. Let's see some of the sources. Number 7. Says the book of Leviticus, I will scatter you among the nations. And when you get there, I will unsheathe the sword after you. Deuteronomy. Remember, I told you there was 2 descriptions of the exile. One in Deuteronomy and one in Leviticus. Deuteronomy 28:65 through 67. Among those nations you shall find no repose, not a foot of ground to stand upon. For there the Lord will give you an anguished heart and wasted eyes and a dismayed spirit. You will live in constant suspense and stand in dread both day and night, never sure of your existence. Now granted, we have it pretty good in America right now. America has been known as what's called a Medina Shel Chesed, a country of kindness. We have to be thankful to God for it every single day. However, if you think about what a Jew's life was like back in Europe, they literally never knew when the next pogrom was going to happen, when the next blood libel was going to happen. When is a horde going to come barreling down from the castle sent by the baron, or coming barreling up from the other peasants and just come into our village and burn our houses and rape our women and steal our stuff? And this happened all the time. All the time. Even today in America, I don't know if you can share this experience, but you just watch the rising anti-Semitism all over the world, and you feel helpless. There's like this fear. Where is this going? What's going to happen next? Why is it being more and more acceptable to be an anti-Semite on college campuses all over America where the youth are being raised? Why is it becoming acceptable to be an anti-Semite in Port Huron, Michigan, where all these militias are? From the right and from the left, we're seeing a massive rise of anti-Semitism in America. And there's a sense of like dismayed heart and wearied spirit, never sure of what's going to happen. What's going to happen to my children? Okay. So that is the third wonder. The third wonder. Now again, a wonder doesn't necessarily have to be a good thing. Not all miracles are good things. Some miracles are bad things, right? The story of anti-Semitism is an absolute miracle. It makes no sense. How it occurs is beyond the natural order of the world. It's an absolute miracle because 0% of the world has faced what we have faced in this way. So when the Torah makes this prediction, saying what we're going to go through and describing it in great detail, by the way, if you want to see further, look up those sources in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Read that whole those whole chapters. Scary stuff. Scary stuff. So that book described it, and despite it making absolutely no sense, it's been happening. It's been coming true. Next, the next one is a short one. The idea that we have always remained small in number. How many Jews live in the world today?
About 15 million.
Okay, between 13 and 15, we'll call it. Okay, how many Jews lived in the world before the Holocaust? About the same number. How many Jews lived in the world before the exile from the Romans? About 12 million. So if you look at the history of the world, the Jewish people, the population, it's interesting because you look at any group that's been around for a long time. There's some sort of population boom. At some point, they're huge, right? The Roman Empire, at one point, when they exiled us, we were about 14 million, 12 million. They were about 140 million. The descendants of those people are today about 1.5 billion. The descendants of the Jewish people, by that calculation, should be about 115 million. But we've always remained small in number. And again, that's another thing where it's written about in the book itself. Number 8, and you shall remain few in number, whereas you could have become as numerous as the stars of the heaven. Next, not because you are more numerous than any people did the Lord delight in you and choose you, for you are the least of all the peoples. It's it's a very small one, short, we'll move on from that one. We're about to get to the good stuff, by the way, so I know it's been a little heavy until now. But it's an amazing thing that this book that said that we were going to be an eternal nation, also said that we were going to be exiled, which happens to almost nobody, said that we were going to be hated and treated viciously, which happened to nobody else like us, and also said that we're never going to attain a large population, which also has never happened to any other great nation. Every great nation has always had population booms. We've never had them. We've always remained small in number. But it's in the book, and that's what happens. Okay, next. Now let's get to the good stuff. My friends, now we get into light unto the nations. The good stuff, okay? So, the Torah predicts that we are going to be a light unto the nation. Let's first see the sources. Source number 9. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. You shall become a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who curse you. Through you shall all the communities of the earth be blessed. Okay, Genesis. Next, Isaiah, and this is where you see the words of light unto the nations. I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness and will hold your hand and keep you. And I will establish you as a covenant of the people for a light unto the nations. Next, Exodus 19:5 and 6. Now if you obey me and keep my covenant, then you shall be my special treasure among all the nations, for all the world is mine. And you will be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation to me. Now the reason why I brought the third one, there's more sources that are like this. The reason why I brought the third one is because I want to explain very sort of clearly before we get started. The role of the Jews as light unto the nations is ideally supposed to be a moral light. Ideally, we are supposed to bring godliness into the world. There's a verse in the Torah that says, it's a verse in the prophets that says, Atem Eidai Ne'um Hashem. You are my witnesses, says God. Our job is to be those who testify. What does a witness do? It brings into the courtroom something that happened that other people don't necessarily see. Our job is to bring godliness into the world. Many people say, I don't see God. We, as the Jewish people, what we're supposed to be doing is act in such a divine way that people see us acting and say, there must be a God. There must be a God. And by the way, I can tell you many stories of people who have said that upon seeing various actions of Jewish people, saying, wow, there must be a God. And that's the goal. Now, in order for us to be able to do that, God has given us what I believe to be a higher voltage in our electricity. So, you have 110 and you have 220, right? America runs on 110, Israel runs on 220. It's just a higher voltage. Because we have an outsized job in this world, God gave us outsized capabilities. Now again, what we're supposed to be using that electricity is to turn the spiritual chandeliers on in the world and light up the world and bring godliness to the world. However, what's fascinating is if we don't use our talents to spiritually and morally light up the world, and instead put that electricity into a different socket, we still have an outsized effect. Which is why we're going to see that Jews had an outsized effect on the world in almost every area, whether it be physics or art and literature and style and so many areas that we've had, medicine, math, right? Because again, we were given this 220 voltage because we've got a very important job. And again, the job was really to morally light up the world, which we're going to see we've done an amazing job of that as well. But evidently, if we don't use it for moral light, we can use it for any kind of light. Okay, so let's first look at the moral light. How did we change the world morally? Did we turn on the lights for the world? So for starters, let's talk about monotheism. Who brought monotheism to the world? Clearly the Jews, right? And today, about half the world is monotheistic. So we literally brought the very tenets of monotheism, very, very core belief in most religions that follow it, to the world. So that's a pretty big light that we brought to the world. Half the world, instead of being pagan, is now monotheistic. Next, let's talk about other ideals that the Jews brought to the world. The sanctity of life. To us, it's such a given that you're not supposed to kill. It was not a given thousands of years ago. Then the given was the stronger you are, the might equals right. You take what you can take by force. The wars, the battles, the bloody. If I'm a stronger country than you, then I can just roll into you and take you over. That was the way the world ran. If a child was born with any kind of defect, now look at the great Roman and Greek civilizations, Western civilization, right? We look back with such fondness to Plato and Aristotle and Socrates and Seneca and the great Roman Senate. They were all major advocates of killing any child that was born with any kind of defect. You can read from Seneca, the great Roman philosopher, a whole discussion about how don't consider this to be a bad thing, because this is just choosing the good over the bad. Not only that, I don't know if you realize this, but there was massive, massive female infanticide going on during the Greek, especially, and Roman eras, because at that time, primary love was between men. Women were seen pretty much as baby factories. And we have records of cities where the ratio of males to females is 7-1. That's not a natural thing. We have letters from a merchant who was in Alexandria, and he's sending a letter back to his wife in Greece and saying, listen, I know that you're pregnant, make sure you eat more, and I want you to be healthy, and the baby to be healthy. If the baby is a boy, make sure to increase eating of milk and honey so that you'll be strong. If it's a girl, dispose of it. It's just like a letter. It's like a letter. And by the way, amazingly, women were most often the ones who were carrying out the female infanticide. A woman would carry a baby for 9 months. The baby's born. It's a girl. They would put the babies in pots and throw them out in the forest. Or they would have mothers smothering their own child who just came out of their womb with a pillow. We can't imagine it. Judaism came along and said every single life is sacred. Boy, girl, developmentally sound, developmentally disabled. That was the idea of thou shalt not kill, which we take as such a basic, was not a basic premise in society. The Jews brought that to the world. The ideal of peace. Again, peace was not an ideal for thousands of years. The ideal was conquest. And when the world finally says, we got to get together and make peace, they make the UN. What's the verses they find outside the UN building? Isaiah. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not wage war against nation, and they shall no longer learn war. Isaiah. The ideal of peace is a Jewish ideal. We brought that to the world. So the idea of universal education, the first universal education system ever described is in the Talmud. I could go here. There's so many values that are so powerful, that are part of our society. Look, even, what do we call today religious values? Judeo-Christian values. What does Judeo-Christian values mean? It means Jewish values that were adopted by the Christians, right? I taught history for many years, for 8 years. And I remember in the textbook it said, what are the main tenets of Christianity? So one of the main tenets of Christianity is love thy neighbor like thyself. I'm like, that's not a tenet of Christianity. That's from our book. That's V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. But it's called one of the main tenets of Christianity. Where did they get that from? So all those Judeo-Christian values of family and helping out the needy, etc., etc. Remember, in Sparta, helping out the needy was not a good thing. Right? So this idea is that Judeo-Christian values, they're Jewish values that we brought to the world. So we have turned on the light morally for the world in many, many major ways. How about physically? There's a whole lot of that here. Let's see. The Wall Street Journal. By the way, can we get an extra 10 minutes today? Is that possible? Yeah. If anyone wants to leave early, please do. But there's just too much good information, and I don't want you guys to miss out on it. Okay, the Wall Street Journal ran a 3-part series at the end of 1999. Remember the whole Y2K thing? So it was describing we're looking back at the 20th century. Who were the 3 people who had the greatest influence on the 20th century? Guess who they were? Einstein, that's one. Freud, very good. Freud. Not Roosevelt.
Stalin.
Not Stalin, although think about who, because Stalin was only in Russia. Remember, there was communism all over the world. Who's the father of communism?
Lenin.
Karl Marx.
Oh, Marx.
Right now, he didn't live in the 20th century, but his work basically influenced the world of communism, which was the major diabolical sort of good and evil pushback of the whole 20th century between China and Russia and Cuba and all that, right? And Vietnam and Pol Pot and all in Cambodia. So of the 20th century, the three people who had the greatest effect on the entire world: Einstein, Jew; Karl Marx, Jew; and Freud, Jew. How do you understand that? We, the people who don't even make up 1% of the world, we, the people who don't even make up 0.5% of the world, we, the people who make up 0.2% of the world, have all three of the people who had the greatest effect on the 20th century. Incredible. Insane. Total miraculous. You cannot, that doesn't happen by mistake. It's impossible. 1/6 of Nobel Prizes have been awarded to Jews, despite the fact that, remember, for many years, Jews could not get into universities all over the world, including America. Jews had quotas, right? My last name is Burnham. Do you know why? Because my grandfather couldn't get into medical school, because his name was a Jewish last name, Berman. So he changed his last name from the Jewish last name, Berman, to the non-Jewish last name, very much non-Jewish last name, Burnham. And boom, he got in. Right? So think about it. We had our hands tied behind our backs the entire time. Jews are at the forefront of every major push for social change. If you think about the SDS, the Students for Democratic Society, right, taking over America in the 60s and pushing for social change, for women's rights, for rights, for civil rights, for all people, about 60% of the SDS members were Jewish. Who were the two people who started that movement? Jerry Rubin and A.B. Hoffman. Guess how much of those were Jewish? In fact, the American Council of Education in 1966 and 67 put out a study trying to figure out which campuses are going to be pushing for change on behalf of women, on behalf of civil rights, and this is what they wrote. The best single predictor of campus protest was the presence of a substantial number of students of the Jewish background. Isn't that amazing? What we're pushing for, till this very day. In 1967, 40% of the Peace Corps was Jewish. Now, in terms of income, Jews have by far the highest income in America of any ethnic group, 72% above the average, and the next closest group, which is the Japanese, is 40% over the average. So we are, in terms of income and earning power, way above. We are overrepresented in huge numbers in various fields. So for example, by 231%, we are overrepresented in medicine, 233% in mathematics, 265% in law, 300% in dentistry, and 479% overrepresented in the area of psychiatrists. If you don't feel comfortable with that, have a session with Dr. Goldberg and tell him about it. Okay, fine. Here's an amazing thing. Jews, wherever they have gone, have been aggressively successful. Think about American economy. Think of big names in economics. Who is currently the head of the Fed? Janet Yellen, Jew. Who was before her? Ben Bernanke, Jew. Who was before him? Alan Greenspan, Jew. Right? Economic advisors to the president. Larry Summers, previous president, Jew. Jared Kushner, Jew. Right? Okay, so these are crazy numbers, crazy facts. Let's talk about American culture. Let's talk about the movie industry, Hollywood. Who built up Hollywood? So let's talk about MGM. MGM Studios, been around forever. What does MGM stand for? Metro, not a Jew, well, not a person, right? Metro Goldwyn, Jew. Mayer, Jew. SKG, right? The major powerhouse studio that puts out DreamWorks and all those films. Who's SKG? Spielberg, Jew. Katzenberg, I don't know. No, Jew. And Geffen, Jew. Right? It's crazy numbers. Crazy numbers. Think about the most popular TV shows. Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm, Jew and Jew. It's unreal. Let's talk about fashion in America. Who is the most iconic American fashion designer? Ralph Lauren. What is Ralph Lauren's real name? Raphael Lifshitz. Raphael Lifshitz, a good old Landsman from Lower East Side. Isn't that amazing? Amazing! He's the most iconic American designer, influencing the design of American fashion for literally decades and decades and decades. He's a good old Jewish boy too. So in terms of the influence that we have been a major light into the nations. Now again, the main role is to be a light morally and spiritually. However, when we don't do that, wherever we plug those 220-volt electricity sockets into, we do tremendous things in lighting up the world. Like literally no other nation in the planet. There is no other nation that has had the success that we have had proportionate to our numbers. Right? 16% of Nobel Prizes, despite not even making up, not even a half of 1%. That's the fifth wonder of Jewish history. So that same book that said we were going to be persecuted and beaten and killed, which we were, also said we are going to have the most incredible success in the world, which we have. Next, the next wonder of Jewish history. The chameleon-like quality of the land of Israel. What is the land of Israel? Is it a place that's amazing, flourishing, fertile? Is it a place that is bare, rocky, repulsive, dreary, and empty? So I'm going to tell you, let's look inside at our source sheets, okay? And let's see that God describes both as realities. Number 10, your God is bringing you to a good land, a land with flowing streams and underground springs, gushing out in valley and mountain. It is land of wheat, barley, figs, and pomegranates, a land of oil, olives, and honey dates. It is a land where you shall not eat your bread in rations, and you will not lack anything. A land whose stones are iron, and from whose mountains you will quarry copper. When you eat and you are satisfied, therefore you must bless your God for the good land that he has given you. Sounds like an amazing utopia. And by the way, we can read about how it was like that, and we'll get there in a second. One more source, I have come down to rescue them from Egypt's power. I will bring them out to a land that is good, a spacious land, to a land that is flowing with milk and honey. Exodus 3:8. Has that ever been the reality? Let's read Josephus, the Jewish Roman historian from the beginning of the second millennium. Sorry, from right around the turnover from BCE to CE. For the whole area is excellent for crops or pasturage, and rich in trees of every kind, so that by its fertility it invites even those least inclined to work on the land. In fact, every inch of it has been cultivated by the inhabitants, and not a parcel goes to waste. This is Josephus describing the land of Israel. It is thickly covered with towns, and thanks to the natural abundance of the soil, the many villages are so densely populated that the smallest of them has more than 15,000 inhabitants. Josephus, The Jewish Wars, Book 3:2, Penguin Edition, page 192, if you want to read it inside. So that seems to be like Israel, this amazing place. But yet there's another verse in the Torah, in the book of Leviticus, source number 12, that says, "So devastated will I leave the land that your very enemies who come to dwell in it will stand aghast at the sight of it," indicating this land's going to be terrible, devastated, bare, rocky. Did that ever happen? Well, let's read. Now, what we're going to read now is really remarkable because these sources, and a lot of the sources that we gave before, are not Jewish sources. The source we're about to give is Mark Twain. Mark Twain was a big friend of the Jews, and he was dying to see the Promised Land. And he finally made the trip. And listen to what Mark Twain writes about his experience in Israel, which, by the way, should also help shape our idea of this whole Palestinian conflict. Just to understand what Israel looked like 100 years ago. "We traversed some miles of desolate country, whose soil is rich enough, but is given wholly to weeds. A silent, mournful expanse. A desolation is here that not even imagination can grace with the pomp of life and action. We reached Tabor safely." Listen carefully. "We never saw a human being on the whole route. We pressed on towards the goal of our crusade, renowned Jerusalem. The further we went, the hotter the sun got, and the more rocky and bare, repulsive and dreary the landscape became. There was hardly a tree or a shrub anywhere. Even the olive, and the cactus, those fast friends of a worthless soil, had almost deserted the country. No landscape exists that is more tiresome to the eye than that which bounds the approaches to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is mournful, dreary, and lifeless. I would not desire to live here. It is a hopeless, dreary, heartbroken land. Palestine sits in sackcloth and ashes. Over it broods the spell of a curse that has withered its fields and feathered its energies. Palestine is desolate and unlovely, and why should it be otherwise? Can the curse of the deity beautify a land? Palestine is no more of this workday world. It is sacred to poetry and tradition. It is a dreamland. And by the way, we don't have time right now, but you can read a few more sources right here in your sheets describing how the land of Israel was literally empty, basically. There was no one there. There was no agriculture there. Very different world. So here we have two verses in the Torah, one describing Israel as being amazingly prodigious, land flowing with milk and honey. One verse describing the land being so devastated that your enemies will stand aghast at the sight of it. And we see that both of those came true. How do you understand this? Nachmanides, the great Jewish sage, went to Israel, and he himself described the horrors that he saw. He was shocked. He also was so much looking forward to getting to the land of Israel, and he writes a letter to his son, and he praises the land of Israel, but you can see, he describes, he's quite disappointed by what he sees. And then he comes up with a brilliant idea that he discusses. And he says like this: the land of Israel, one of the greatest miracles of the land of Israel is its chameleon nature. The land of Israel is at the crossroads of the world. It's right in between Asia and Europe and Africa. It's an amazing location. There's a great reason for many civilizations to want to control and sit in Israel. God knew that if other nations settled in Israel, it would be very, very hard for us to ever get back our land. So God made the land into a chameleon. When the Jews are on it, it just sprouts forth and is green and lush and flowing with milk and honey. When the Jews are kicked out of it, God ensures that the land is so withered and devastating that nobody ends up being able to stay there. And everyone ends up leaving it empty so that eventually we could come back. Imagine if the land of Israel had been literally filled with millions of people tilling the land and building homes and building everything there. We would never have been able to come back to the land of Israel. But God made this amazing miracle, and you can literally read the sources describing it in both states. And if you read the context of the Torah describing it being flowing with milk and honey, it's when we're there. And when the Torah's context of saying it's going to be devastating is when we're sent to exile. An amazing, miraculous land that no one else in the world has. There's no such other land that reacts differently to who's living on it. And then the final wonder of Jewish history: the return of the exile and the reflourishing of the land. Never in history has a nation exiled from its homeland for thousands of years come back. Never, ever, ever. And we have come back to the land of Israel after thousands of years of exile. And guess what? The land is giving of itself once again. That chameleon land is opening up. The land of Israel blossoms. The deserts are giving forth fruit. The fruits and vegetables you eat in Israel are being grown in the deserts. The palm trees that are growing all over. It's an amazing thing to watch. And by the way, people from countries all over the world come from Israel to learn from their techniques. And yes, they've got great techniques, the drip technology and all that. But at the end of the day, no one has been able to replicate the success of Israel's green revolution. The agricultural output of Israel from 1950 to 1990 increased 7 times over. That's an amazing thing. The land has come back. The people have come back. Never before in history has this happened. Let's see the sources on that, and then we'll wrap up with a cool sort of takeaway idea. Look at source number 15. The Lord your God will turn your captivity and have compassion upon you, and will return and gather you from all the nation amongst whom the Lord your God has scattered you. If your outcast be at the utmost parts of the heavens, from there the Lord your God will gather you, and from there he will fetch you. And the Lord your God will bring you into the land which your fathers possessed, and you will possess it. And he will do you good and multiply you more than your fathers. Next, says the prophets, as for you, O mountains of Israel, you shall shoot forth your branches and bear your fruit for my people Israel, for their return is close at hand. For behold, I am with you, and I shall turn to you, and then you shall be tilled and sown, and I will multiply men upon you, the entire family of Israel. Then I will multiply men and animals upon you, and they shall increase and be fruitful. I shall cause you to be inhabited as you were in your former times, and I will make you even more bountiful than you were in your beginnings. You shall know that I am God. Ezekiel. Now listen to this amazing thing. We're going to read 2 sources. One of them written in the late 11th century. One of them written somewhere between the late 16th century and early 17th century. Rashi says, and again, when Rashi wrote this, probably around the year, who knows, like 1095, the idea of coming back to Israel was a dream. No one even thought of it. He wrote, "When the land of Israel will yield its produce in superabundance, this will signal the approach of the end of the exile. There is no clearer end than this." Isn't that amazing? Rashi wrote that years ago when there was no dream of it, not even a glimmer. Next, the Maharshal of Shmuel, Eliezer Adels, wrote, "As long as Israel does not dwell on its land, the land does not give of her produce as she is accustomed. When she will begin to reflourish, however, and give of her fruits in abundance, this is a clear sign that the end, the time of redemption, is approaching when all of Israel will return to their land." So my friends, good things are coming down the pipe. Good things are coming down the pipeline. Let's review the 7 wonders of Jewish history. Again, every other nation tells you what's going to happen in Kingdom Come. Every other religious study book tells you what's going to happen in Kingdom Come. Are they telling the truth? I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows. No one ever came back. Our book is the only religious text that doesn't tell you at all what's going to happen in Kingdom Come, tells you very explicit things that will happen in this world, and makes crazy, bold predictions. Predictions that don't happen to almost anybody else or nobody else. Let's go over the predictions. You will be an eternal nation. How many peoples have been here for the last 3,500 years? Maybe 0.1% of the world. 99.9% of the world has not been. The idea of exile, 99.9% of the world has never experienced an exile, and 0% of the world has been exiled twice. Number 3, the hatred, the persecution, the anti-Semitism. Nobody ever in the history of the world has experienced it like we have. Number 4, remaining small in nation despite being around forever. We've never been able to have a population boom. Another wonder. Number 5, the light unto the nations. What other nation has had this effect on the world? None. Number 6, the chameleon land being incredibly prodigious and yet shutting down when the people are not there. No other country. And finally, the return of an exile and the reflourishing of a land which has happened to nobody else in all of history. My friends, if any one of these things happened on its own, you could say, wow, that was super cool. But when these things start happening again and again and again, and they're all exactly as predicted, you look at this and you know that we are the chosen people, and that whoever wrote this Torah book not only has knowledge of what would happen in history, but has strong control over all of history. So when that guy sits down next to you on the plane and says, "How do you know you're right?" you bust out your notes from this class and you let him have it. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful, wonderful summer.